Well, this time we're working on something motorcycle related, but not even Italian. We've got a bit of British bike work to do. So this is the back wheel out of a friend's BSA B31 or B33, and at some point a previous owner has replaced the original taper roller wheel bearing setup with a set of modern sealed bearings, but the work hadn't been done very well, and the bearings were definitely not in good order. So the owner's got himself reproduction rear wheel spindle and all the necessary bearings and spacers, but there was a little bit of modification work needs doing to those, and the first thing to do was to take the bearings out, which I've got over on the bench. So this is the motley collection of parts that came out of the rear wheel. So up at the top is the spindle, and see the finish on the spindle isn't great. That clearly had some chatter, and some of the spacers and bushes on there are got some unusual features, and it's I don't think the length was really right. But onto the bearings. So those are standard metric bearing. That was a 6203, I think. And to fit it into the hub, it had this little adapter. Well, clearly it wasn't machined particularly accurately to size, because, as you can see, it was glued in with some Loctite or bearing fit grade Loctite or other equivalent, and there's no lip in this adapter to retain the bearing in lateral position. Over on the other side, things were similarly bad. Now you look at the amount of grease around the outside of this adapter, and you can see that it obviously wasn't a tight fit in the hub. Even if it had some adhesive on there, it's hard to tell at this stage. And there is just about visible in there. Let's see if we can. Yeah, you just about see there was the vague hint of a lip to retain the bearing, but then the bearing wasn't tight because it had a piece of Dr. Pepper can around the bearing, and it still wasn't tight in there. It almost slid out on its own anyway. So not a good setup. And then the real surprise was the spacer between the bearings, which for some reason has a foot peg rubber on it, which made it somewhat reluctant to move to the side so I can knock the bearings out. So that will all be going. I think the housings in the wheel are going to be okay to fit the original style outer races into. If they're not quite as tight as they should be, then, you know, some bearing fit will be fine. If they don't just drop in, then I'm happy with a bit of bearing fit, even if they're not as tight as they should be. Well, that's about it for this part of the horror show. It's just a case of modifying a couple of the parts of the new spindle kit. This is the part we've got to modify. We've got to reduce this diameter here down to fit into the frame. It's a rigid frame, and it slides backwards and forwards for chain adjustment. So this was sized to be a fit in something like a 11/16 inch slot, so it's about 16.75 millimeters, I think it measured out at. It needs to come out to about 15 millimeters, so there's just about enough metal there for it to be a reasonable thing. I did notice, I mounted one of these up a moment ago, the flats have been milled and they're not particularly concentric to the thread, so it's running out, but it's not going to really matter. And I've bumped this one around until the the face is running true to the spindle, so we'll just then machine it down to the required diameter. So just check the tightness of the chuck and we'll get on with it. Okay, I'm just now touching the back, so I'm going to set up a bed stop and skim out the eccentricity, measure it, and then we'll come down to size. So I'm getting 16.36. We'll take that down. Just a final skim on there. Take down, pretty much dead on 15. Give it a chamfer and then just another one to do. And this is how the whole plot goes together. So we've got the spindle, 2 taper roller bearings, and 2 bearing adjuster nuts, which have just got a pair of flats on them for adjustment. On this end there's a lock nut. You've got 2 snail cams that butt up against presumably a stop on the frame, and we've got a square machined on this end which would then rotate these for the adjustment. So they would go on next, like so, and then the nuts that we've just modified. Before that, we've got the seals, which is just a pressed cup with a piece of felt in, and that goes around the bearing adjuster and presses into the hub. So that would get knocked into the hub in that position once, of course, all the bearings have been loaded up with grease. So I'll leave that for the owner to do the final assembly. But the bearing races were a decent fit in the hub. I don't think they're going to give trouble. So that's another little job successfully concluded.